The rain in London didn't just fall, it judged. It washed over the glass facade of the Shard, blurring the city below into a gray smear of ambition and failure. Inside the penthouse office of Vanguard Logistics, Serafina Vance stood before a holographic display of the world's oceans. Thousands of blue dots, cargo ships, tankers, freighters pulsed like a digital heartbeat. She was 31 years old, and her company, Vanguard, was currently valued at $1.2 billion. She had built it from a single coding script written in a damp basement in South London. Her phone chimed. It wasn't a notification. It was a summons. The estate. 8 p.m. Black tie. Do not make me wait. The sender was Alistair Vance, her father, the man who had once been the undisputed king of the Atlantic, the man who, 7 years ago, had stood on the marble steps of the Vance family manor and watched as security guards threw Seraphine's suitcases into the mud. You want to marry a teacher? Alistair had roared, his voice echoing through the manicured gardens. A man with no lineage, no fire. Then you can live like him, penniless, forgotten. You are no longer a Vance. Serafina looked at her reflection in the glass. She wasn't wearing the mud-stained coat from 7 years ago. She was wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that cost more than her father's first car. Her hair was pulled back in a lethal, tight bun. She picked up her desk phone. Marcus, is the ink dry? The transfer was completed at 4:12 p.m. Syrah, her lead counsel, replied, You are officially the majority holder of the Leviathan note. You own his throat. Are you sure you want to do this tonight? Serafina watched a blue dot on her screen. Vance International. Tanker stall in the middle of the Indian Ocean. A metaphor for a dying empire. My father doesn't believe in mercy, Marcus. He believes in leverage. It's time I showed him I'm a quick learner. As the Bentley sped toward the Vance estate in the outskirts of Surrey, Serafina closed her eyes. The scent of the leather seats reminded her of everything. She had lost and everything she had gained. After the exile, she and Elias, the teacher her father so despised, had lived in a world of silence and hunger. Elias wasn't just a teacher. He was a brilliant mathematician who had lost his tenure because Alistair Vance had made a few phone calls to the university board. They lived on poverty stew, boiled potatoes, and hope. Serafina remembered the winter of the third year. The heater had broken. They had huddled under 3 blankets, their breath visible in the air. We can go back, Syrah, Elias had whispered, his hands trembling. I hate seeing you like this. Just apologize to him. No, she had said, her jaw aching from the cold. If I go back now, I'm his property. If I stay here, I'm a person. I'd rather freeze as a human than live in a palace as a pet. That night, she had opened her laptop and started writing the algorithm that would eventually become Vanguard. It was a system that predicted shipping delays before they happened, bypassing the bloated, inefficient bureaucracies of men like her father. Hunger, she realized, was a sharper tool than any Ivy League education. It taught her how to calculate risk with the precision of a surgeon. By the time Vanguard secured its first $5 million in seed funding, she hadn't just built a company. She had built a weapon. The Vance estate was a fortress of old money, iron gates, oak-lined drives, and a house that felt more like a museum than a home. Serafina stepped into the dining hall. The air smelled of beeswax, expensive lilac, and the sour scent of Alistair's favorite scotch. Her mother, Eleanor, sat at the long mahogany table, her eyes red-rimmed but her posture perfect. Her brother, Julian, sat to the left. Julian was the golden son, the one who stayed, the one who obeyed, and the one who was currently snorting his way through the family's dwindling fortune. Alistair sat at the head of the table. He didn't look up when Serafina entered. He was cutting a piece of venison with a silver knife, the metal screeching against the china. Sit, Alistair commanded. Serafina sat. She didn't tuck in her chair. She didn't unfold her napkin. You've done well for yourself, Serafina, Alistair said, his voice a low growl. I saw the Forbes cover. The tech queen of logistics, cute, but tech is a bubble. Reality is made of steel, and ships. Things you've forgotten. I haven't forgotten anything, Alistair, she said. Least of all the way the mud felt on my shoes 7 years ago. Alistair chuckled a dry, hacking sound. Still bitter. That's good. Bitterness is energy. But energy needs a container, he signaled to Julian, who slid a thick, leather-bound folder across the table. I've been watching your board of directors, Alistair continued. They're nervous. You're aggressive, you're young, and you're a woman. They don't think you can handle a real crisis. So I've made it easy for them. I've spent the last 6 months quietly buying up the secondary shares of Vanguard. Seraphine's heart didn't skip a beat. She knew this was coming. I now control 38% of your company, Alistair said, leaning forward, his eyes gleaming with the predatory light that had terrified her as a child. And tomorrow morning, I am filing a petition with the High Court to have you removed as CEO on the grounds of mental instability. I have 3 independent psychologists who have reviewed your erratic behavior, your history of estrangement, your obsessive work habits, your unfortunate choice of husband. Eleanor let out a small, stifled sob. Alistair ignored her. You have 10 minutes to sign over your remaining shares to the Vance Family Trust, Alistair said. In return, I will give you a generous stipend and a quiet house in France where you can play with your husband. If you refuse, I will crush you publicly. I will turn Vanguard into a footnote and leave you with nothing but the clothes on your back. Again, Serafina didn't flinch. She picked up the crystal glass of water, took a slow sip, and set it down with a clink that seemed to echo through the silent room. It's a beautiful plan, Alistair, she said. Classic, brutal, very 1980s. But there's a problem. With steel and all, it requires cash. A lot of it. Alistair's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? Vance International is hemorrhaging money, Serafina said, her voice dropping into a cold, clinical register. The port strike in Singapore cost you $80 million. The fuel hedging disaster in June cost you another $120 million. You're over-leveraged. Dad, you've been surviving on bridge loans for 18 months. Julian shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Alistair slammed his hand on the table. My debt is private. It's handled by the Swiss. It was handled by the Swiss, Serafina corrected, until they got scared. They bundled your debt, the Leviathan note, and sold it to a private equity firm called Aegis Holdings to get it off their books. She pulled a small, sleek tablet from her clutch and slid it across the table. I bought Aegis Holdings 4 hours ago, Serafina said, which means I don't just own your debt. I own the covenants attached to it. Alistair's face went from pale to a dangerous, mottled purple. You spent your liquidity to buy my debt. That's suicide. You've crippled your own company's growth. Growth can wait, Serafina whispered. Revenge is a time-sensitive asset. She tapped the screen of the tablet. Clause 1 for C of the Leviathan. Note states that if the debtor's debt-to-equity ratio exceeds 4:1, the creditor has the right to demand immediate and full repayment of the principal. As of 30 minutes ago, when I leaked the news of your failed merger with Maersk to the Financial Times, your stock dropped 14%. Your ratio is now 6:1. The room went ice cold. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. I am calling the loan, Alistair, Serafina said. I want $412 million tonight by wire transfer. Alistair tried to stand, but his legs seemed to fail him. He slumped back into his chair, looking less like a king and more like a broken statue. You can't do this, he rasped. The family. The legacy ... The legacy died when you threw your daughter out for the crime of being happy, Serafina said. She stood up, smoothing her suit. I don't want your shares in Vanguard. Keep them. They'll be worthless. Anyway, once I announce that Vanguard is absorbing the assets of a bankrupt Vance International for pennies on the dollar. She turned to Julian. Julian, you've been a loyal soldier. You knew Dad was drowning, didn't you? That's why you've been funneling money into that offshore account in the Caymans. Don't look so surprised. I own the bank, too. Julian turned ghost white. Serafina walked to the head of the table. She leaned down until she was inches from her father's face. He smelled of defeat. You have 24 hours to vacate this house, she said. Everything in it belongs to the creditor now. The cars, the art, even that silver knife in your hand. I've already contacted the movers. They'll be here at 6 a.m. Where am I supposed to go? Alistair whispered, his voice cracking. Serafina smiled. It wasn't a cruel smile. It was worse. It was indifferent. There's a studio apartment in South London, she said. It smells like damp plaster, and the heater doesn't work. I hear the rent is quite affordable. Maybe you can find a mathematician to explain to you how you lost everything to a girl who didn't know her place. Serafina walked out of the manor and into the cool night air. The rain had stopped. The stars were beginning to peek through the clouds. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Elias. Pasta's on the stove. Cheap wine is open. Come home. She leaned against the Bentley, the engine humming softly. For years, she had imagined this moment. She had imagined the screaming, the crying, the satisfaction of watching Alistair Vance crawl. But as she looked back at the darkened windows of the estate, she didn't feel the rush of adrenaline she expected. She felt empty. The weight of the Leviathan was gone, but so was the anchor that had held her for 7 years. She climbed into the back of the car. Home, Arthur, she told the driver. The office, ma'am? No, she said, a small smile finally reaching her eyes. The apartment. I have an empire to run tomorrow. Tonight, I just want to be a person. The following weeks were a whirlwind of legal firestorms. The collapse of Vance International was the largest corporate failure in a decade. The headlines were relentless. Vance reign ends, daughter's revenge. The logistics queen takes the crown. Serafina sat in her new office, the one Alistair had occupied for 40 years. She had changed everything. The mahogany was gone, replaced by minimalist glass and sustainable bamboo. The portraits of dead ancestors were replaced by digital screens, showing real-time global data. A knock came at the door. It was Julian. He looked haggard, his designer clothes replaced by a simple sweater. Sira, he said, standing in the doorway. Julian, I thought you'd be halfway to the Caymans by now. The accounts were frozen, he said simply. You're good. I never realized how good. What do you want, Julian? I'm busy. Dad's. He's not doing well, Julian said, his voice low. He's staying in that apartment you told him about. He sits by the window all day, staring at the street. He won't eat. Serafina didn't look up from her screen. He's a grown man, Julian. He'll survive. Or he won't. That's the nature of the market. Is it worth it? Julian asked. Having all this power, but no family left. Serafina finally looked up. Her eyes were like flint. I have a husband who loves me. I have a company that employs 10,000 people. I have my dignity. That's more of a family than Alistair Vance ever gave me. Julian nodded slowly. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I should have stood up for you back then. Apology accepted, Serafina said. Now, if you want a job, my logistics department needs a junior coordinator. Entry level. The pay is terrible, and the hours are long. But you'll learn the business from the ground up, just like I did. Julian looked at her, stunned. Then, for the first time in his life, he stood up straight. When do I start? Monday, 6 a.m. Don't be late. 6 months later. Vanguard was no longer just a logistics company. It had become the backbone of global trade. Serafina had used the Vance assets to build a fleet of fully electric, autonomous cargo ships. She wasn't just predicting the future. She was forcing it into existence. She stood on the deck of her flagship, the Vanguard Alpha, as it prepared for its maiden voyage from the port of London. Elias was beside her, his hand in hers. He wasn't a teacher anymore. He was the head of the company's research and development wing, turning his mathematical theories into the world's most advanced AI. "Look at them," Elias said, gesturing to the rows of containers being loaded by silent, robotic cranes. "You did it, Syrah. You built a world where he can't hurt us." "No," Serafina said, looking out at the horizon where the sun was beginning to rise. "I built a world where I don't have to think about him at all." Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She took it out, ready to ignore another business alert. It was a photo from an unknown number. It was a picture of a small, wooden desk in a cramped apartment. On the desk was a single, framed photo of a young Serafina, smiling, before the world had turned cold. Next to the photo was a handwritten note. "I was wrong. You were the only one with the fire." Serafina stared at the screen for a long moment. Her thumb hovered over the delete button. The wind blew her hair across her face, smelling of salt and the endless possibility of the sea. She didn't delete the photo, but she didn't save it either. She simply locked the screen and put the phone away. "The tide is turning, Elias," she said, her voice steady and clear. "Let's go." As the massive ship let out a deep, resonant blast of its horn, Serafina Vance turned her back on the land and looked toward the open ocean. She was no longer a daughter of a fallen king. She was the architect of her own destiny. And for the first time in her life, the view was perfect. While the world saw a triumphant Serafina, the internal reality of Vanguard was a different beast. Success attracts predators, and the board of directors, men who had grown rich under Alistair and even richer under Serafina, began to feel that she had become too powerful. 2 weeks after the launch of the Vanguard Alpha, a secret meeting was held in a private club in Mayfair. "She's too emotional," said Lord Holloway, a man whose family had owned ports since the Victorian era. Buying the Vanstad was a personal vendetta. It wasn't good business. It was a woman with a grudge using our capital as a plaything. "She's also making the industry too transparent," another board member grumbled. "Our margins depend on the fog of shipping. She's burning the fog away." They plotted a silent coup, using a loophole in the corporate bylaws. They planned to issue a vote of no confidence during the annual general meeting. They had the votes. They had the media on standby. They didn't realize that Serafina had been recording the entire meeting via the smart chandelier she had gifted the club 6 months prior. The morning of the AGM annual general meeting was cold and bright. The auditorium was packed with shareholders, analysts, and reporters. Lord Holloway stood at the podium. "We are here to discuss the future of Vanguard. While we admire Ms. Vance's spirit, we believe her recent actions regarding the Vance International acquisition were impulsive. Therefore, the board moves for nothing." Seraphine's voice rang out from the back of the hall. She walked down the center aisle, her heels clicking like a countdown. She wasn't alone. Behind her were 20 young men and women docks workers, engineers, and junior coders, the people who actually made the ships move. "Lord Holloway," Serafina said, reaching the stage, "before you cast your vote, perhaps the shareholders would like to see the transparency report I've just published." She signaled to the tech team. The giant screen behind Holloway flickered to life. It wasn't a financial report. It was a map of Holloway's private accounts, showing systematic kickbacks from illegal poaching vessels and unregulated oil rigs in the Arctic. "You call my acquisition of Vance impulsive?" Serafina asked, her voice echoing through the stunned silence. "I call it cleaning the house, and I'm not finished." She looked at the other board members. "Every one of you has spent the last decade betting against the environment and against your own workers. I didn't just buy my father's debt. I bought yours too. I've been buying your mortgages, your yacht loans, your daughter's tuition bonds. I don't just run this company. I run your lives. Holloway went purple. This is blackmail. No, Serafina said, leaning into the microphone. This is a hostile takeover of a corrupt generation. You are all fired. Effective immediately. The shareholders began to cheer, not because they loved Serafina, but because they loved a winner. By the end of the year, Vanguard was no longer a company. It was a sovereign entity of the digital age. Serafina Vance was the most powerful woman in the world. But power has a price. Elias stood in the doorway of their bedroom one night. You didn't come to bed until 4 a.m. again. The North Atlantic route had a glitch, she said, rubbing her eyes. I had to fix the code. The code is fine, Sarah, Elias said softly. It's you. You're becoming him. Serafina froze. I am nothing like him. You're obsessed with control, Elias said. You've built a fortress around us, but I feel like I'm living in a vault. You don't trust anyone, not even me. Serafina looked at her hands. They were shaking. The same tremor she had seen in her father's hands during that final dinner. I have to be this way, she whispered. If I let go for even a second, they'll tear me apart. Then let them, Elias said. I'd rather have a wife in a basement than a queen in a castle I can't enter. He left the room, leaving the door open. Serafina sat in the silence of her $50 million penthouse. She looked at the holographic globe on her nightstand. The blue dots were still pulsing. The heartbeat of the world. She realized then that revenge was a fire that consumed the builder as much as the target. She had won the war, but she was losing the peace. The next morning, Serafina did something she hadn't done in 7 years. She drove herself. No driver, no security. Just a nondescript electric car. She drove to the South London studio apartment. The neighborhood was grimy, the air smelling of diesel and fried food. She climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor. The hallway smelled of damp plaster. She knocked on the door of 3B. The door opened. Alistair Vance stood there. He was wearing a tattered cardigan. He looked ancient. Serafina, he said, his voice a ghost of its former self. I brought you something, she said. She handed him a small envelope. He opened it. It wasn't a check. It wasn't a legal document. It was a key to a small cottage in the Cotswolds, a place where he could garden and watch the birds. No ports, no ships, no power. Why, he asked. Because, Serafina said, her eyes softening for the first time in years. I realized that as long as I'm punishing you, I'm still tied to you. And I'm tired of being tied to the past. Alistair looked at the key, then at his daughter. A single tear tracked through the wrinkles on his cheek. I'm sorry, Sarah, for everything. I know, she said. Don't be late for the moving truck. It's 6 a.m. I hear the Cotswolds are beautiful in the spring. She turned and walked down the stairs, her heart feeling lighter with every step. Serafina returned to the office, but she didn't go to the CEO suite. She went to the R&D floor. Elias was there looking over a new set of equations. He looked up, surprised, as she walked in. I've appointed a new chief operating officer, she said. A woman named Maya from the Singapore office. She's brilliant, ruthless, and 25. She reminds me of someone I used to know. Elias stood up. And what are you going to do? Serafina walked to him and took his hand. I'm going to be a consultant, part-time, and I'm going to learn how to cook something other than poverty stew. They stood together, looking out the window at the Thames. The ships were moving, the world was turning. And for the first time, Serafina Vance wasn't trying to pull the strings. She had signed her own eviction notice from the Empire of Anger. She was finally truly free.